Hello and welcome once again to this series of talks on Christianity and the climate emergency. And our theme this time is energy and buildings. And it's particularly good to have the company of Simon Ross with us today. Simon is director of the Marches Energy Agency, where he's been working for some 13 years. His background is in the armed forces and he worships at Holy Trinity in Much Wenlock. Simon, it's really good to have you with us today, and we look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
John, many thanks indeed for the invitation to be here, and it's a real pleasure. It's great to be able to talk to you about energy and buildings, and I've subtitled my presentation Faith in Action because as a Christian, I want to try and link these subjects to my faith and to talk about those two together. And so it's really great to be here and for the opportunity to do so. So really, I just wanted to start by outlining my own witness as a Christian in relation to our climate and ecological crisis, and therefore how that flows through to my work and our work in terms of energy and buildings. So the first thing really to say, I think, is that I feel I've lost faith in consumerism, and did so probably a decade and a half or so ago. I feel it's leading to a very dangerous place in relation to how we treat the earth, and I think the way that the earth is now responding to that neglect that we've been showing towards the earth for many years. And there has been a long-standing sense of grief that I continue to try and work through. I think grief at loss of species, grief at degrading of the natural world, grief at those people who are suffering as a result of climate impacts now. And I think as a father also grief of the impact and the sense that I don't really feel that my children are going to inherit this earth from me in the same way that I've inherited it from my parents. And I think the freedoms to enjoy it that you and I have mostly taken for granted, I don't think that will be theirs to use and to benefit from. And that really is a very deep source of pain for me. And I continue to work it through, but yet in the Bible, I do find the most wonderful support and help and guidance. I find that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. And it's not just the earth, it's the whole universe as well, and it has been for over 14 billion years. And it's more than that, different layers of God as well, operating deep within us, seeking to reconcile us back to him, hunting us out in the very depths of our being. And so we've got all these different levels which for me are operating and provide a wonderful sense of hope and love in order to help guide the response that I'm bringing to this crisis. We're also required through the example of Jesus as well to look after the most vulnerable, and all the way through the Old Testament as well to look after the foreigners, the elderly, the widows, the children, the orphans among us, and that's still as relevant today as it was 2,000-3,000 years ago. All of that for me comes into being and is sustained by and is reconciled back to God through Christ. And of course there I'm sort of plagiarizing from the hymn at the start of Colossians and the prologue to John's Gospel. So all of this, as I read the Bible in this sense, gives me a permission to open to the wonder and the beauty of God's creation, to see it as an expression of God's love for us. And I find that very humbling, very surrounding, very embracing, and to view the earth in that way is a wonderful opportunity. Also as well, it through Christ's birth, life, death and resurrection, I also know that I can be forgiven when I get it wrong, and I can then come back to this again and try again and again and again, and I can keep going and I can make mistakes because I know that I am forgiven for trying to do what I'm doing. And this for me is faith in action, and that's the primary thing, that sense of faith in God as a creator and a sustainer and a reconciler, and also as well my work is a sense of the action that stems from that place. So I really like this next diagram. It's by a lady called Kate Rayworth at the Environmental Change Institute at Oxford University. It's called Donut Economics. And really for me, when I saw this diagram a couple of years ago, the penny dropped in relation to our work at Marches Energy Agency about trying to link fuel poverty, looking after the vulnerable with the climate change, with the impact on the earth. And Kate in her donut is talking about a green space in this diagram, which is the safe space for humanity to operate in. She describes a social foundation, which is about looking after the vulnerable people of the earth in terms of energy, water, food, health, housing, education, political voice, equality. But there's also an ecological ceiling as well. So here we're looking at issues of climate change, ocean acidification, land use change, biodiversity loss, ozone layer depletion, air pollution, etc. And for me, our work at Marches is really concentrating on both the housing and the energy aspects in terms of the social foundation, but also touching on health and education, and also in terms of climate change, primarily in terms of the ecological ceiling. So for me, I really like this diagram as a visual representation of those two aspects of our work.
So, I mean, just a moment ago, you were talking about your Christian faith and your particular motivation in respect of that. And it just struck me that obviously that many people, such as Kate Rayworth, I don't know what her faith commitments are, but many people would be committed to a broadly similar environmental agenda without professing Christian faith. I just wondered what you reckoned was distinctive about what a Christian brings to this particular agenda.
It's an interesting question, John. I think, from my perspective, I think there are two things. First of all, I think it's that sense that the earth is a very good creation as far as God sees it, in terms of all its beauty, in terms of all its complexity, in terms of all its variety. And therefore, for me, that introduces a sacred element to the earth, not to be worshipped in its own right, but as a manifestation of God's love for all of us. And I think the second thing which feels unique in terms of my Christian faith is the forgiveness that's available to me and to you and to all of us in terms of getting it wrong, in terms of being reconciled back to God so that we can try again. And that opens a path for me to keep pushing on in relation to responding positively to our ecological crisis that we're facing.
Great, thank you. So do carry on.
Thank you. So then, in terms of the social floor, the fuel poverty work that I was talking about a little bit, I've got two examples here of our work at Marches Energy Agency, just to give a feel, try and bring this to life a little bit. So this lady, Danielle, it's not her real name, but she had an electrically heated flat, not a great deal of money, £130 a week that she was living on. She didn't really know how to use the electric heating in her home properly. Consequently, in winter, she was regularly using her electric fires in the day, meaning that she was using the most expensive rate of electricity, costing in the order of 20p per unit of heat versus mains gas, where you may be paying 5p for a unit of heat. There were long-standing billing issues going back many years, and we got involved to try and resolve those. We had partial success, but it was difficult and complicated. And we didn't really resolve it satisfactorily, although we did have some movement, some improvement for her. But she said, "This is eating my funeral savings." So she had never had much money in the first place, and it was costing her 4 or 5 grand just to be heating this over the couple of years that she was there. There was mains gas in the road. The picture in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see that she lived in one of the sheltered housing homes in the L-shaped in the middle of the photograph. There was mains gas running in the road just to the bottom of her home. But the Highways Agency said, look, we can't break the road for 7 years. It's only just recently been laid. So come back to us in 3 or 4 years' time when the 7-year mark is up, and maybe we can reconsider it at that point. We could have paid for that gas connection. It could have been fully funded. We couldn't have paid for the in-house bits at the time. And unfortunately, her housing association, even if we could have got the gas connection done, were not willing to do the gas connections in terms of the boiler, radiator, hot water cylinder. And again, to quote her, she said, I'd have loved to have had mains gas. Part of that being, well, if you're paying 5p for a unit of heat versus 20p and you haven't got a great deal of money, it makes perfect sense, really. There were also health issues for her as well. She was regularly in and out of hospital in the local GP's practice, and she described herself, and I quote, as a boomerang patient. She was a wonderful and sparky lady, but there were, I think, mental health issues around the grief of her partner who she lost, and I don't personally feel that was ever resolved properly. And she was socially isolated in the community, and unfortunately she passed away sort of 2 years ago now. But there's a number of points in there really just to illustrate what fuel poverty looks like for us. It's not obvious, but it's there in terms of health, it's there in terms of expensive heating solutions, it's there in terms of social isolation, and these are the sort of people that we're trying to support and help. And in the example of Danielle, we're not always as successful as we would like to be sometimes. However, we feel the next example is perhaps a much more positive outlook on it. In this case, it's a single mother with a young child, and this is within a mile of the Cathedral in Hereford. At the time when they came to us, the child was sitting her mock exams. It was January, it was freezing cold outside, and it really struck a chord with me because my own lad was sitting his mock GCSEs at the same time, and I was just reflecting on the impact his revision at that time would have had if we'd had a single heater downstairs, in this case an open coal fire, and how on earth he, in this case the daughter, would have been able to concentrate in terms of preparing for their mock exams. When our heating contractor went round to have a look at the home, they came back and they said, look, this isn't just going on for a year. We think this has been going on for a long, long time. And the evidence they gave for that is that they said, look, the boiler's leaking. It's been leaking for so long and so badly that the floorboards on which this boiler is propped up have completely rotted away, and we can see the cavity underneath the floorboards. So, then you're thinking, well, this isn't just an isolated incident of a boiler breaking this winter. This has probably been going on for several winters. And that child was 16 at the time she was sitting her mocks. Has this been going on for what, 5, 10 years of her schooling? I just simply don't know. But luckily we were able to get a new boiler installed. Our fantastic heating contractors changed the floorboards as well at the same time. And a lovely quote from the mother: I'm so happy. The attitude of all people involved was great, really trying to help and do positive things. So that's a really, really positive outcome for us. And it's great that we're able to help people under those circumstances. We're in we're in lockdown at the moment around COVID-19 at the moment, and fuel poverty continues. We're expecting it, if I'm honest, probably to be worsening in terms of some of the indicators that are coming through around the recession that we're heading into, and it's currently May 2020. And I'm wondering if any of you out there can help us to find and support more householders in fuel poverty in the way that I've described just above. Something like 12% of all householders in the diocese are in fuel poverty. Government figures are suggesting that's in the order of 15,000 homes within the diocese. Can you help maybe promote the work that we do through a project called Keep Shropshire Warm, which is funded by Shropshire Council? Have you got church or parish networks? Have you got access to Facebook? Are you part of a mutual aid groups that are popping up all over the place in terms of the COVID-19 lockdown at the moment? Perhaps you're linked to a food bank, so maybe people there you're supporting are coming forward struggling with food. Are they struggling with energy issues as well at the same time? And whilst our support has changed under lockdown, we are able to provide help on the phone or with a remote home visit around fuel debt, around tariff switching. We can support householders to at least get ready with insulation, be that wall and roof, and with heating upgrades, so that can be boiler repairs and first-time central heating installs as well. So there are significant opportunities there to be helping people. Unfortunately, most of our installers can't come in at this time and support householders, although we do have one company who are able to come into homes where there is a real emergency in terms of a vulnerability to health through not having access to heating or hot water. So we do have one funding route whereby people can still receive emergency mains gas boiler repairs only. So if you're in Shropshire, we're running this project, Keep Shropshire Warm, backed by Shropshire Council. There's a free phone number there, 0800 112 3743, or an email address to contact us on. Alternatively, if you're in Herefordshire, a very similar project there is running, backed also by Herefordshire Council, 0800 677 1432. And if you can, I would urge you please to get in touch and either to help access the support that we can provide, or to help us to promote the services that we do have, so we can reach and support more vulnerable people at this time.
Simon, if I were having some problems with my heating bills at the moment, and I had a choice, say, between installing a new heating system on the one hand, or putting some new insulation in on the other, which way would you go on that?
I think in terms of cost effectiveness, cavity wall and loft insulation is always the winner every time. So if that's available to you, that's the route I would be suggesting. However, our experience is that the crisis is really around heating and hot water. If your boiler's broken and it's cold, or you've got no hot water, you're in a crisis situation. The insulation can wait. But I think the other thing I really would stress at this point is, if you are struggling, please do call Keep Shropshire Warm or Keep Herefordshire Warm, because we can help. I can't guarantee we can help under every circumstances, because the funding, does change, but there is support that we will be able to provide. So if you are struggling and you are in need now, please do call, and I'm sure there's something we can do to help.
Great, thank you.
I want to change track a little bit. So that really, from a Christian perspective, is around our work to support the most vulnerable. I want to just change track and look at that ecological ceiling in Kate Raworth's donut. And here really to focus on the climate change. So this really is about energy use and the linkages through into climate change. And this really is important for me. I want to just try and get this point across as best I can. But if I start in the bottom left-hand corner, what we're looking at here, you can see a dark blue and a light blue wavy line that's going up and down. It's showing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and how it's varied over 200, 300, 600, 800,000 years. You can see where the blue line is at its lowest, that's an ice age. Where it's at its highest, it's an interglacial period, so we haven't got an ice age. And then if you come across to the right-hand side of that, you can see an orange line rising steeply with a little red, very thin line on top of it. So that's really the last 500 years of our existence. And really the orange bit and the red bit is the amount of extra carbon dioxide that we've stuffed into the atmosphere in the last 150, 250 years, that sort of time frame. If you follow the very top of that red needle up to the top left-hand corner, you can see a red wiggly line that's gradually going up, and you can see the years 1960 through to 2020. And the underlying trend there continues to be upwards in terms of the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide there is, and it's measured on the left-hand side in parts per million. So that would be 360 parts per million of carbon dioxide molecules for every million of air molecules. So it's not a great deal, but it is enough to impact upon our climate and to be warming it. If you then move across to the diagram in the top right-hand corner of this slide, you can see the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere really during the last month. And you can see that the yellow dots are getting over 416, in some cases over 418 parts per million. I do want to stress this because around the time that I'm doing this talk, which is the 12th of May, we always see in early May an annual spike, and that annual spike is always the highest in the existence of Homo sapiens. It's not in the existence of the latest government or even since the birth of Christ, but is in the existence of Homo sapiens. And so every year we head more and more into uncharted territory, the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere. And that hurts, and it's painful, and I'm scared, and it scares me. And we really have to try and find the strength to address this head on in some way if we can. My next couple of slides really are giving some practical examples of things that we are doing in order to try and think about that. And the first of those is around energy use in Holy Trinity Church, Much Wenlock, where we've been taking regular meter readings for a couple of years now. We've measured the carbon footprint of the church. It's 27 tons of carbon dioxide a year. A ton of carbon dioxide is equivalent to fill a hot air balloon, one of those big ones. So the image I carry in my head is perhaps of 27 hot air balloons every year being generated by Holy Trinity Church, and that's new carbon dioxide that's going into the atmosphere. It's linked to the fact that we have an active policy of creating a warm church, so the heating goes on at the end of September, it comes off at the end of April, and it's on 24/7 in between. It means that the church is warm and welcoming, and anybody, members of the congregation or visitors, can go there and they can worship God in a warm church in winter whenever they want to. But there is an interesting tension there. We have changed to LEDs. 50% saving in our summertime electricity use has resulted from that. And that's the LEDs really in the nave. We then did think about putting photovoltaics onto the roof of the church. It's grade 1 listed. And to be honest, we looked at the amount of hurdles we would have to jump through with the in terms of listed building consent, etc. And we didn't have a great deal of time before the then finance mechanism from the government, the feed-in tariff regime, was due to end. So we changed the focus and we developed business cases and got 3 quotes to put photovoltaics on the roofs of the 3 clergy houses within Much Wenlock. And as part of that developmental work, we engaged the diocese to seek their permission and their support and their position. And they said, this is great, we're really up for this. And they took those on and they ended up commissioning the photovoltaic panels on the 3 roofs, and they ended up paying for the work. And now the diocese is benefiting from the feed-in tariff. So that's great. So that's a really, really positive outcome for us. We managed to get some insulation to the church roof when that was up for some routine maintenance. And all of that has part contributed to the Bronze Eco Church Award that we've been able to get. Eco Church is a programme being run by Arosha, a Christian charity, which provides a really great structure for churches to be thinking about all sorts of ecological issues, not just issues of energy, but in terms of faith and worship and outreach and plastics and fair trade products and wildlife in the churchyard, etc. It's a really great programme. We're currently working on an action plan to get to silver, and we're also looking, as part of that, we're looking at renewable energy options in the church. So I'm feeling nervous here, if I'm honest. It's a difficult position. It's a 1,000-year-old building. We're on a mains gas system. It's a leaky old building, and there really isn't a natural renewable energy solution coming forward at this stage. But we do need to formally look at it, and the PCC, the Parochial Church Council, is willing to do that. And if we can find a solution, that's great. If not, when the mains gas boiler comes up for replacement at the end of its natural life, then we'll have to go with the mains gas boiler. But my hope is perhaps it'll spark people in their own homes to be thinking about renewable energy options more creatively, and perhaps to use that learning to think about measures that they can put into their own homes in the process. So that it won't be wasted work. My final point is that maybe we could be looking at some sort of joint bid. Are there other churches out there in the diocese that would willing to perhaps partner on a thing called the Rural Community Energy Fund, which is designed for community-facing organisations in rural communities to be thinking about renewable energy options. We do know from funding under this programme elsewhere that they are willing to support perhaps a deanery or perhaps a group of churches coming together to reflect upon and think about and develop plans for renewable energy options in some way. So I put that out there. Perhaps some other churches might be willing to perhaps partner in some way around that opportunity. My final point perhaps then is around energy at home and ways that we could think about what we could do at home in terms of reducing our energy consumption. So the obvious starting point really is our energy performance certificates. You can see my own here in the top right hand corner of this slide, and all those that have been produced are publicly available at www.epcregister.com. So if you don't have a hard copy of yours, you can go to that register, put in your home address, and you can access your energy performance certificate. And it's a really great way to help you think about your current energy use and some of the options that you could think about reducing it. It talks about lighting, it talks about boiler efficiency, it talks about heating controls, it's talking about insulation in the walls and the roof and in the floor as well. So there's some really good stuff in there to help us all to be thinking about potential energy saving options for our homes. If your home is already relatively energy efficient, there are greater levels of ambition around. The energy performance certificate methodology is a little bit crude, and there are emerging programs such as Passive House and Energy Sprung. These are European energy efficiency methodologies. Passive House gives a real attention to detail in terms of insulation at the walls, with the windows, at the floor and the roof. And also it's thinking about the orientation of the house to the sun so you can maximize solar gain. It's thinking about perhaps heat recovery systems in the home. So perhaps cycling of the air out and not just letting the warm air escape, but actually extracting warm air from that before it's changed with fresh air outside. So there's some really good attention to detail, and they're looking to achieve 80% reductions in current heating use. So really ambitious and exciting programs of work coming forward around that. And Energy Sprung is a Dutch program doing very similar things. There are still renewable energy options at home that we could all be thinking about. Photovoltaic systems using the sun's power to generate electricity are still around. There are still installers within the diocese who are still active and fitting, and photovoltaic systems. And while we've seen a reduction, well, a cessation of the energy's feed-in tariff regime, there is a thing called the Smart Energy Generation Tariff. And some of the energy companies are offering tariffs around this, which provide a small amount of money, 4 or 5p per unit of energy generated that you're selling back to the grid. So there are still mechanisms whereby you can earn money for generating renewable energy on the grid. There's also the renewable heat incentive, which rather than using around electricity generation, works in terms of heat demand. And that programme is still available through government policy under the Renewable Heat Incentive till March 2021. And we are expecting, there was a budget extension recently, and we are expecting probably an extension for that programme for a year. So this is an income stream to help you think about installing solar hot water systems on the roof, or air source heat pumps, or ground source heat pumps, or biomass boilers of some description. So the renewable heat incentive is still there, providing incentives around heating options, renewable energy heating options in the home. And we're also seeing a gradual uptick of storage. So perhaps if you've got some photovoltaic panels, it's giving you an opportunity to store that energy in your home, and then to use that energy in your home, perhaps in the evening, maybe when the sun's not shining, you come home from work and you need more electricity to power your home. And we're seeing battery storage solutions and potentially in the next couple of years, electric vehicle options. So the idea perhaps being that you could use the sun to power up your electric vehicle at home during the day, if that's relevant for you. And then at night, the energy flow could move from the electric vehicle back to your home to power your home. So there's a lot of kind of technological innovation that's going to be moving over the next couple of years. And there's just a couple of examples of things that are emerging. My final point really is just around local installers and how we look to support people in our communities going forward, perhaps coming out of COVID-19, perhaps in terms of the low carbon agenda. And I've mentioned 3 local installers here. They're all within a mile of my home, which you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of this picture. Lime Green up on Wenlock Edge are providing a solid wall insulation solution, internal and external, for older properties, ideal where the home needs to be breathing. Tesha, who are an architectural practice, are qualified to be coming down and modelling my home to passive house standards. So I could be commissioning them to come down and think about how I could really take my own home forward under a passive house design approach. And Edge Renewables, a local installer of renewable energy technologies around biomass boilers and photovoltaic systems on the roof. So no financial relationship with any of those, but I think if you are going to think about energy in your home, could you perhaps also start to think about local installers? So as and when you are making a spend, that spend is going into local pockets of local companies to support and pay local people. So that's also an important consideration for me as well. And in lockdown, are there things that you could be doing? Is there research that you could be doing? Are there perhaps DIY things you could be doing at home? I had a great conversation with a lady a couple of weeks ago. She and her husband were looking to spend their first weekend in lockdown putting underfloor insulation in under their suspended wooden floor, as an example. So are there things that could be done in lockdown in order to make our homes more energy efficient as well? And that really, John, is the end of my presentation. So thank you for the opportunity. I'm Simon Ross from Marches Energy Agency, and happy to answer your final question.
Simon, thank you so much for sharing that with us. Again, a great deal to reflect on there, and some super practical pointers along with that. Yeah, so one final question that occurs to me is, outside the home, what do you think is the biggest impact I could have regarding energy use?
Okay, I think it's quite a difficult one, that, but I've got 2 suggestions in mind, and they really are only that, suggestions. The first is perhaps to think about energy use in your church. I was struck when we were doing this in Holy Trinity that actually it took us 2 weeks to find it took me 2 weeks to find the gas meter, another 2 weeks to find the boiler, and then quite a bit of time to start to engage the PCC around all of this as well. So are there things that you could do just to quietly gather some meter readings, understand your current energy use, turn that into a carbon footprint, engage your PCC, register your church for an Eco Church Award, and start to think about an action plan to move your church towards bronze? I mean, those are kind of practical things. If you don't have that access to a church, do you have access to a school or a community building? Perhaps are you part of a local town or parish council with a village hall? So again, all of those things could apply equally to a local school or to a local public building of some description. And I think really my final point as a Christian would be to say, could you read that lens? Could you read the Bible through the lens of, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and combine that with the ecological crisis that we're facing, and just see how God is talking to you in these times, and to pray about that, and to reflect about that, and to face your pain and grief, and try and find others that you can discuss that with. Because for me, this is the powerhouse of change. It's the fact that God loves us and He loves the whole of His creation, and we've got to wake up to that fact. And I think we've got to face it. We've got to face the fact that we haven't been great about knowing that or acting upon that for a long, long time. So, and that's part of that forgiveness and that reconciliation and that renewal, which I see, which I find through my own faith. So I hope that helps too, in some way.
Simon, thank you. Yeah, again, such pertinent points there. So much of this is down to motivation, isn't it? And what stirs our hearts to make a difference and to make the changes that absolutely need to be made. Thank you very much again, Simon, for that. That was excellent. And thank you for watching. And do tune in again to the final installment in this series of talks on Christianity and the climate emergency.